The diamond pendant caught the light as Margaret Lancaster's trembling fingers reached toward it. "Where did you get this?" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. The young waitress froze, her tray still balanced on one hand, completely unprepared for what would happen next. In that upscale Manhattan restaurant, surrounded by the city's elite, a $23 necklace was about to unravel a mystery that had tormented one of America's wealthiest women for 27 years. Margaret Lancaster didn't do emotional displays. The 72-year-old CEO of Lancaster Industries had built a cosmetics empire worth $4 billion through calculated decisions and an ice-cold demeanor that made grown men tremble in board meetings. Her perfectly styled silver hair, designer suit, and 3-carat diamond earrings spoke of old money and absolute control. She had buried a husband, outmaneuvered countless competitors, and never once let anyone see her cry. Until today, the waitress, whose name tag read Jasmine, stood motionless as this powerful woman stared at the simple silver chain around her neck. The pendant was nothing special, just a small locket shaped like a heart with a tiny engraving on the back. Jasmine had worn it every day for as long as she could remember. It was the only thing she had from her past, the only connection to a life before foster homes and group facilities. "Ma'am, I need to take your order," Jasmine said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. She had worked at Dominique's for 6 months, saving every penny for nursing school. This job was everything to her. She couldn't afford to lose it because some rich lady had fixated on her jewelry. But Margaret wasn't listening. Her eyes remained locked on that necklace, her face draining of color. The other diners at nearby tables had started to notice. Whispers rippled through the restaurant. Margaret Lancaster was a fixture in Manhattan society. People recognized her, and right now, she looked like she had seen a ghost. "Please," Margaret said, her voice breaking, "please tell me where you got that necklace." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably. Her manager, Robert, was already heading their way, his expression tight with concern. Robert ran Dominique's with military precision. He had made it clear when he hired Jasmine that wealthy clients were never to be disturbed or questioned. They were to be served with silent efficiency and grateful smiles. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Lancaster?" Robert asked smoothly, inserting himself between the billionaire and his waitress. "I apologize if there has been any inconvenience." "I need to speak with her," Margaret said, ignoring Robert entirely. "Alone, please." The entire restaurant had gone quiet now. Forks hung suspended over plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Margaret Lancaster, known throughout New York for her composure and dignity, was crying. Actual tears streamed down her carefully made-up face, cutting tracks through her foundation. Jasmine's heart pounded. She had no idea what was happening. The necklace had been with her since she was found as an infant, abandoned in a hospital bathroom in Newark. It was the only clue to her identity, the only thing whoever left her had bothered to include. For 27 years, it had hung around her neck, a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, hadn't wanted her. "Mrs. Lancaster, perhaps we should move this conversation to my office," Robert suggested, his tone professional but firm. The last thing he needed was a scene. Several diners were already recording on their phones. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of $100 bills, tossing them onto the table without counting. "Keep the change," she said to Robert. Then she turned to Jasmine. "Please, I'm begging you. 5 minutes of your time. That's all I ask." Jasmine looked at her manager. Robert's jaw was tight, but he nodded curtly. 5 minutes. In the back office. The walk through the restaurant felt like miles. Every eye followed them. Jasmine could hear the whispers, feel the weight of judgment. She was just a waitress. Margaret Lancaster was royalty. Whatever this was about, it couldn't be good for her. The office was small and cramped, dominated by a desk covered in invoices and reservation books. Margaret closed the door behind them and turned to face Jasmine. Her hands were shaking. "That necklace," Margaret began, her voice thick with emotion. "I gave it to my daughter, 27 years ago. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jasmine felt the room tilt slightly. "I don't understand," she whispered. Margaret reached into her purse again, this time pulling out her phone. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. She held the screen toward Jasmine. The photo showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and bright eyes. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on a very pregnant belly. And around her neck hung a necklace identical to the one Jasmine wore. Her name was Caroline, Margaret said softly. "My daughter. My only child." Jasmine stared at the photo. The woman did look familiar. Or maybe she was just seeing what she wanted to see. What happened to her? Margaret's face crumpled. She died in childbirth. 27 years ago, at a hospital in Newark. There were complications. The baby survived, but Caroline didn't make it. She paused, struggling to continue. "I was traveling in Europe when it happened. By the time I got back to New York, they told me the baby had been adopted. The agency said it was a private adoption, already finalized. I tried everything. Hired investigators, lawyers, but the trail went cold. The room felt too small suddenly. Jasmine couldn't breathe. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that necklace belonged to my daughter," Margaret interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "And the only person who should have it is her child. My grandchild." Jasmine's legs gave out. She sank into the chair behind her, her mind racing. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen in real life. She was nobody. Just another kid the system had failed, bouncing from foster home to foster home until she aged out at 18. "I was never adopted," Jasmine said finally. "I grew up in foster care. They found me in a hospital bathroom. Someone had left me there with just that necklace and a blanket." Margaret's expression shifted from hope to horror. "A bathroom? You were found in a bathroom?" "Newark General," Jasmine confirmed. 27 years ago, March 15th. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth. "That's the hospital where Caroline died. March 15th was the day she gave birth." The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was too terrible to contemplate. Jasmine had spent her entire life wondering why she had been abandoned. She had created stories in her head, imagining scenarios where her mother had no choice, where circumstances had forced an impossible decision. But this was something else entirely. "Someone took you," Margaret whispered, the realization dawning in her eyes. "Someone at that hospital took you and left you in that bathroom. They stole you from me." Jasmine felt tears streaming down her own face now. "Why would someone do that?" "Because you were worth millions," Margaret said bitterly. "As my sole heir, you would inherit everything. Caroline wasn't married. The father was never in the picture. That meant you were my only grandchild, my only living family. Someone must have thought they could profit from making you disappear." The enormity of it crashed over Jasmine like a wave. She had grown up with nothing, shuffled between homes where nobody really wanted her, where she was just another check from the state. She had worn thrift store clothes and eaten donated food. She had worked 3 jobs to save enough for community college. And all that time, she had a grandmother, a family, a fortune that should have been hers. "We need proof," Jasmine said, forcing herself to think rationally. "We can't just assume based on a necklace." Margaret nodded vigorously. "DNA test. We can do it right now. I have a lab on retainer. They can rush the results." "But even if it's true," Jasmine continued, her voice breaking, "how do we find out who did this? It's been 27 years. Margaret's expression hardened. The grief in her eyes transformed into something else. Something cold and determined. "We find them," she said simply, "and we make them pay." What neither woman knew yet was that the person responsible was closer than they could have imagined. Robert, the manager who had been listening at the door, felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. 27 years ago, he had been a nurse at Newark General. A nurse with gambling debts and no way out. a nurse who had been approached by someone who promised him $50,000 to make a baby disappear. He had told himself it would be fine. The baby would be found. Someone would adopt her. He would pay off his debts and never gamble again. But things hadn't gone according to plan. The baby had been in that bathroom for hours before someone found her. By then, he had already fled New Jersey, started over in New York, and tried to forget what he had done. And now, that baby was serving tables in his restaurant. And her grandmother, one of the most powerful women in America, was about to uncover everything. Robert's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He needed to call someone. He needed help. But who could help him now? The woman he had been working for, the one who had orchestrated the entire thing, was dead. Had been dead for 15 years. And she had taken all the details to her grave, except she hadn't. Because sitting in a safe deposit box in a Manhattan bank was a letter. A letter his contact had insisted he keep as insurance. A letter that detailed everything, signed and notarized. At the time, he had thought it protected him. Now he realized it was his death sentence. Inside the office, Margaret was already making calls. Within an hour, a private DNA testing service had arrived at the restaurant. Within 3 hours, they had preliminary results. Within 6 hours, it was confirmed. Jasmine Torres was actually Jasmine Lancaster. The missing heir. The stolen baby. The granddaughter who had been presumed lost forever. The news broke like a thunderstorm. By morning, every major outlet was running the story. Billionaire's missing heir found working as waitress. DNA test confirms. Restaurant worker is Lancaster fortune heir. 27 years later, the mystery of the stolen baby solved. But Margaret wasn't interested in the media circus. She was interested in justice. She hired the best investigators money could buy. She demanded the hospital turn over every record from 27 years ago. She subpoenaed bank records, employment files, security footage that should have been destroyed years ago but somehow still existed in a forgotten archive. And slowly, methodically, the truth emerged. It took 3 weeks to connect all the dots. The nurse who had been on duty. The $50,000 deposit into an account that hadn't been touched in years. The gambling debts. The mysterious woman who had paid for everything, whose identity remained hidden behind shell companies and deceased lawyers. Robert tried to run. He made it as far as the airport before Margaret's security team intercepted him. Not violently, just efficiently. A hand on his elbow. A quiet conversation. A car waiting to take him somewhere he couldn't escape. The woman sat across from him in the back of the limousine, her face a mask of controlled rage. "I want names," Margaret said quietly. "Everyone involved. Every person who knew. Every person who helped. Every person who stayed silent." Robert broke. He told her everything. About the woman who had approached him, Victoria Ashford, who had been Margaret's business partner at the time. About how Victoria had been systematically stealing from the company and needed Margaret distracted. About how she had hoped that making the baby disappear would destroy Margaret completely, leaving Victoria free to take over Lancaster Industries. It had almost worked. Margaret had spent years drowning in grief, barely able to function. The company had suffered. Stock prices had plummeted. Victoria had come within inches of a hostile takeover. But Margaret had survived. She had rebuilt. And Victoria had died in a car accident 15 years ago, taking her secrets with her. Except now, those secrets were spilling out. And with them came evidence of other crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Victoria might be dead, but she had accomplices. People who were still alive. People who had profited from stolen money and a stolen child. Margaret went after them all. She didn't just want financial restitution. She wanted criminal prosecution. She wanted prison sentences. She wanted everyone who had played even a small role in stealing her grandchild to face consequences. The district attorney initially resisted. The crimes were old. Evidence was spotty. Witnesses were dead. But Margaret Lancaster didn't accept no for an answer. She used every ounce of her wealth and influence. She hired the best lawyers. She generated media pressure. She made it impossible for the DA to ignore. The trial lasted 6 months. Robert testified against his former accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. He got 15 years. The accountant who had helped Victoria hide the money got 12. The lawyer who had falsified adoption records got 10. 3 other people were convicted of conspiracy and fraud. The hospital paid a settlement of $20 million for their negligent oversight. And every person who had known something but said nothing faced professional consequences that destroyed their careers. But the legal victories, satisfying as they were, couldn't erase 27 years of stolen time. They couldn't give Jasmine back the childhood she should have had. They couldn't undo the trauma of foster care, the loneliness, the constant feeling that she didn't belong anywhere. Margaret knew this, so she focused on what she could control: the future. She brought Jasmine into her home, into her family, into her life. Not as a replacement for Caroline, but as her own person. She paid for Jasmine to finish her nursing degree at Columbia University. She introduced her to the company, not with pressure to take over but with genuine curiosity about what Jasmine wanted for herself. And Jasmine, for the first time in her life, had choices. Real choices. She could pursue nursing. She could work in the family business. She could travel. She could do anything. She chose to start a foundation. The Carolina Lancaster Foundation, named after the mother she never knew. Its mission was simple: reform the foster care system. Ensure no child fell through the cracks the way Jasmine had. Provide resources, support, and oversight. Margaret funded it with $50 million to start. Within a year, they had placed over 300 children in permanent homes. Within 2 years, they had lobbied successfully for legislation that tightened hospital security protocols and created better tracking systems for newborns. 6 months after the trial ended, Jasmine stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium. She wore a business suit that Margaret had helped her pick out. And around her neck, she still wore that simple silver necklace. "My name is Jasmine Lancaster," she began, her voice steady and clear. 27 years ago, I was stolen from my family and left to die in a hospital bathroom. I survived through luck and the dedication of social workers who refused to let me become another statistic. But I shouldn't have had to survive. I should have been protected. The audience listened in rapt silence as she laid out the foundation's plans. New initiatives, partnerships with state agencies, training programs for hospital staff, a hotline for reporting suspected child trafficking or abandonment. "We can't change the past," Jasmine continued, "but we can shape the future. We can make sure no other child experiences what I did. No other grandmother spends decades searching for a grandchild who was stolen. No other family is destroyed by greed and cruelty." The applause was thunderous. But Jasmine wasn't doing this for applause. She was doing it because she understood something that her grandmother had taught her. Power meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others. Margaret watched from the front row, tears streaming freely down her face. But these were different tears. Not tears of grief or rage, but tears of pride. Her granddaughter, the baby she had thought lost forever, had survived. More than survived. She had thrived. And together, they were changing the world. The media coverage of the foundation was extensive. News outlets that had initially covered the story as tabloid fodder now wrote serious pieces about foster care reform and child protection. Politicians took notice. Donations poured in. Other wealthy families started their own initiatives, inspired by what the Lancasters were doing. But the most satisfying moments were the quiet ones. Like when Margaret and Jasmine visited a foster care facility and saw children's faces light up. Like when they received letters from families who had been reunited because of the foundation's work. Like when they sat together in Margaret's penthouse, looking through old photos of Caroline, and Jasmine finally learned about the mother she never knew. "She would be so proud of you," Margaret said one evening, her voice thick with emotion. Caroline always wanted to help people. She was studying to be a doctor when she got pregnant. She planned to continue after you were born. She had so many plans. Jasmine squeezed her grandmother's hand. Tell me more about her. And Margaret did. She shared stories about Caroline's childhood, her stubborn determination, her infectious laugh, her terrible cooking. She showed Jasmine videos and letters. She made Caroline real, not just a tragedy but a person. I wasted so many years being angry, Margaret admitted. After Caroline died and you disappeared, I became hard, cold. I built walls around myself because I couldn't handle any more loss. But those walls also kept out joy, connection, love. You're making up for it now, Jasmine said gently. Margaret smiled. We both are. The necklace that had started everything now hung in a place of honor in the Foundation's headquarters, preserved in a glass case alongside Caroline's photo. Underneath was a plaque that read, "In memory of Caroline Lancaster, and in celebration of every child who survives against impossible odds. May we never forget their worth." Jasmine had a replica made that she wore every day, a reminder of where she came from and where she was going. Robert, serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, heard about the Foundation. He wrote a letter to Jasmine, full of apologies and self-justification. She never responded. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some actions had consequences that lasted forever. He would live with what he had done. She would live with what had been done to her. But she wouldn't let his choices define her future. The other convicted conspirators faced their own reckonings. The accountant lost his license and all his assets. The lawyer was disbarred. They would spend their remaining years as cautionary tales, examples of what happens when greed overpowers ethics. But Jasmine didn't dwell on them. She focused instead on the children she could help, the families she could reunite, the systems she could change. Her nursing degree, when she finally completed it, included a specialization in pediatric care. She split her time between working at a children's hospital and running the Foundation. Margaret often joked that she had less energy than her granddaughter, despite being half a century older. You got your work ethic from me, Margaret would say proudly. But your compassion? That's all Caroline. Lancaster Industries flourished under Margaret's continued leadership, but she began transitioning responsibilities to a management team. She wanted time. Time with Jasmine. Time to make up for the decades they had lost. Time to simply be a grandmother. They took trips together. Paris, where Caroline had been conceived. Tokyo, where Margaret had been when Caroline died. All the places Margaret had traveled alone in her grief, she now visited with joy. And in every city, they looked for ways the Foundation could expand. New partnerships, new programs, new opportunities to protect vulnerable children. The story of the Billionaire and the Waitress became something larger than just a reunion. It became a movement. Foster care reform became a priority issue in state legislatures across the country. Hospital protocols were strengthened. Adoption processes were scrutinized and improved. Background checks became more rigorous. And it all started because of a $23 necklace and a grandmother who refused to give up. 3 years after that fateful day in the restaurant, Jasmine stood once again at a podium. But this time, she was introducing her grandmother, who was receiving a humanitarian award for the Foundation's work. She is the strongest person I know, Jasmine said, her voice filled with emotion. She lost her daughter. She lost years with her grandchild. She could have let that destroy her. Instead, she channeled it into something beautiful, something powerful, something that will outlive both of us and help generations to come. Margaret took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked out at the audience, then back at Jasmine, and smiled. I learned something important, Margaret said into the microphone. Wealth means nothing if you're alone. Power means nothing if you don't use it for good. And family? Family is everything. I would give every penny I have, every asset, every business deal, every accomplishment, just to have those 27 years back with my granddaughter. But since I can't have that, I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure no other family suffers what we did. The speech was short but powerful. And when it ended, Margaret walked directly to Jasmine and pulled her into a long hug. The photographers captured that moment. The billionaire and the former waitress. The grandmother and granddaughter. Two women who had been torn apart by greed and reunited by chance. But it wasn't really chance, was it? It was that necklace. That small piece of silver that Caroline had worn, that she had somehow managed to place around her baby's neck in those final moments before everything went dark. That necklace had traveled through 27 years of foster homes and group facilities. It had survived being pawned or lost or stolen. It had hung around Jasmine's neck like a beacon, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for Margaret to walk into a restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Waiting to bring a family back together. Share this story if you believe that justice can prevail, even against impossible odds. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of never giving up, of fighting for what's right, of using your privilege to protect the vulnerable. Subscribe for more stories that prove truth and love are stronger than greed and cruelty. Your story could be next. Your moment of recognition could be just around the corner. Never underestimate the power of a grandmother's love or the importance of a simple necklace that carries the weight of generations. Justice may take time. It may require fighting against systems designed to hide the truth. It may demand sacrifice and persistence and unwavering faith. But in the end, truth always finds a way. And love never forgets.